What's up, guys? It is the Trans Lesson Plan, your go-to podcast for transgender history. I am your host, Mari, and you guys already know. I don't have to keep saying this over and over again at this point because I feel like you guys already have a hint of what I'm about to say. And of course, that's always going to be, we always got some new content for you on the Trans Lesson Plan. Today, I do want to go ahead and discuss, you guys know how they say that, the first Pride was a riot, right? And that is true. The first Pride was a riot. But I actually want to point out different protests that doesn't get as much knowledge as the Stonewall riots does. And in my opinion, these riots hold just as much significance as Stonewall's impact to the LGBTQ plus community. So today, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to discuss 3 different protests and riots that came about before Stonewall ever occurred in 1969. So, how about we go ahead and get to it? Most of us may not know, but there were a few liberational riots before Stonewall. Today, we're going to discuss those 3 prominent riots that occurred. So, after Christine Jorgensen's famous medical transition and sex reassignment surgery in Denmark in 1952, the general public became aware of transgender individuals. Jorgensen was the first well-known and famous trans woman. So following her operation in 1960s, attitudes towards gender and transgender individuals began to evolve. Gender stereotypes and expressions were shattered, and many feminists abandoned their bras and makeups, and hippies and Beatles members wore their hair long, and that was the occurrence of gender-neutral clothing. But as we all know, to make ends meet, many trans women and drag queens engaged in sex work, which they refer to as hustling, quote unquote. And many of them complained that they ended up in a profession due to a result of workplace discrimination and institutional marginalization. Sex workers were prone to police harassment as well as abuse from their clientele. Some of the women were able, of course, to find work in pubs and in clubs, but many businesses refused to hire them because it was illegal and police potentially would raid the premises at any time. Many other women were compelled to labor on the streets, which they considered, of course, to be a riskier type of employment. From the 1940s to the 1970s, Dewey's was a small family-owned diner franchise that operated in Philadelphia. Dewey's was known for their comfort food to customers and their largely old-fashioned lunch counters. The all-night cafes catered to people from all walks of life, but the establishments on the 13th and 17th streets drew a lot of LGBTQ individuals, especially after the bars had closed. And this establishment was known actually as quote-unquote fag Dewey's. So although the Dewey sit-ins, which took place in Philadelphia in 1965, it is not as well known as the Stonewall riots, as we all know, but it deserves to be. On the following of April of 1965, workers at the Erie turned away over 150 individuals who they all suspected were part of the LGBTQ plus community. The restaurant staff declined to quote-unquote serve a large number of homosexuals and those wearing non-conformist attire, which of course emerged with news for gay men. But these 3 unnamed teens actually, and no supporters that entered Dewey's and refused to leave in the pursuit of their civil rights. Now look, there isn't much really known about the Dewey sit-in, but it did become legendary in the struggle for LGBTQ plus rights. The sit-in by Dewey's can be put in a variety of historical perspectives and the greater background of political protests in the 1960s. Of course, honestly, this was one of the nation's first LGBTQ plus sit-ins, and it has been said that this event, which actually was inspired by the anti-racist sit-in movement that began in the 1960s at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro of North Carolina. Second, the broader background of what was known as the homophile movement at the time, which began in California in the early 1950s and embraced militant direct, action strategies in the mid-1960s. In the early 1950s, gay and lesbians began formally uniting in order to combat the hostility they experienced from authorities. These pioneering groups sought to give knowledge, education, and unification of this oppressed minority and dubbed homophile organizations to emphasize their feeling of community and minimize the sexual part of their identity that is so concerned to the public. So let me go into the next one of Cooper Donuts, also known as Cooper's Donuts. It was a 24-hour cafe famous with the gay and lesbian and transgender population who attended the homosexual and lesbian bars in the Skid Row section of Los Angeles, a quote-unquote gay ghetto in the 1950s and the 1960s. Many gay and lesbian bars in the Los Angeles area were cautious of the LAPD's targeting and harassment of transgender and gender non-conforming citizens and turned them away for fear of being arrested themselves. But Cooper's Donuts was one of the few establishments in the neighborhood to actually welcome transgender individuals. And Cooper's Donuts, despite its location sandwiched between, of course, two homosexual pubs, it became a favorite hangout for the LGBTQ plus community. Detains for homosexuality actually had soared by more than 85% during the tenure of LAPD Chief William H. Parker, who actually took office in 1950. Demanding to see the identifications of individuals is known in rumored LGBTQ plus hangouts was a common form of harassment. They would actually be jailed under the pretext of quote-unquote sexual provision if their outer appearance did not match the gender on their IDs. During this time, actually, two cops had entered Cooper's Donuts one night in May of 1959 and actually singled out 5 individual people. Following the ID checks, the guests, who were 2 trans women, 2 male sex workers, and 1 gay man, were actually escorted out to be detained. And when the officers actually attempted to squeeze all 5 into the same cop car for some reason, one of the men actually began to protest. His protest incited a mob of onlookers to take action, and a group of lesbian, transgender women, drag queens, and gay men all rushed into the streets and began pleading the officers with donuts and paper plates and honestly whatever else they could actually find. The cops actually fled without executing any arrest, and the LGBTQ plus community there rejoiced in their success and actually shouted for their frustrations. But look, so the mob of protesters actually had increased by the time the police had arrived with reinforcements. Of course, thanks to the knowledge of the protest activity spreading down the streets to Main Street, where actually a number of LGBTQ plus friendly bars were located. The reinforcements were dispatched to calm the riot, and a part of Main Street was blocked off for the rest of the night with several arrests made. Of course, despite the fact that police subsequently regained control of the neighborhood, the Cooper Donuts uprising is remembered as the United States' first instance of LGBTQ plus resistance to police mistreatment. Now, I know that you guys probably are like, dang, this is some deep stuff, right? I know. But let's go on to the last one of the Compton Cafeteria riot, which took place in San Francisco's Tenderloin district in August of 1966. The riot was in response to drag queens and trans individuals, notably trans women, being harassed by the police on a regular basis. The incident was one of the first LGBTQ-related riots in U.S. history, taking place actually before the more well-known Stonewall riots in New York in 1969. In San Francisco, it was actually the start of transgender activism. Now look, despite this, many police officers had continued to harass and assault transgender individuals in response to these movements and their increased exposure. The tension that ignited the violence at Compton's Cafeteria in the summer of 1966 was caused by the simultaneous surge in support for transgender rights on the other hand, and the unwillingness to accept these new ideas on the other. A worker at Compton's phoned the cops reporting that some transgender guests had become obnoxious, and the cops arrived at Compton's after receiving the call. A transgender woman had resisted arrest by pouring coffee at the police officer, which started the incident. Customers also said that they flung items, of course, including what they could find at the restaurants, at the cops and the windows, which actually ended up shattering them. They also used their handbags and high heels to attack the cops. And the police fled into the streets to seek reinforcements, where the battle actually ended up continuing. A police car was vandalized, and a sidewalk newsstand was set on fire. The police retaliated by fighting back and attempted to arrest and force the protesters into their cars. On the night of the Compton Cafeteria incident, a member of the San Francisco police force at the time alleged that quote-unquote unnecessary violence was used by authorities. Several transgender individuals Tenderloin Street individuals and other LGBTQ plus individuals had actually ended up gathering at the cafeteria the next day to protest after Compton's Cafeteria refused to let them in. They actually ended up smashing their new windows that they actually had recently put in not too long after the initial confrontation. After the disturbance, Compton's Cafeteria's business decreased and it eventually ended up closing in 1972. Now, although this is all a part of transgender specific history, the first actually public demonstration for LGBTQ plus rights in the United States took place outside the U.S. Army building in Lower Manhattan on September 19th of 1964. Gay men and lesbians were joined by straight supporters to protest the military's discriminatory laws against LGBTQ personnel, which was organized by Randy Wicker. Now look, all of these protests can be related to police raids, of course, nearby any shops and harassment of gender and sexual nonconformists. But protests against these denials of service and constant harassment have a long history of LGBTQ plus individuals struggling for physical and cultural space to resist discrimination, right? Which is, even today, which is some stuff that we still face. Now, I do want to point out that all of these events pioneered centuries of continuous protests and still, to this day, create more stepping stones for the LGBTQ plus community. Look, a lot of today wouldn't be visible to you if it wasn't for these series of events to occur. So as I go ahead and wrap this up, I want you guys to also look into these riots. There are, of course, some other riots like the Black Cat Tavern, which is another one, and a few other places as well. So I don't want you guys to ever feel as though that, Stonewall wasn't significant, because it absolutely was. But you also have to think about, too, what happened before 1969. It was years and decades, of protests that happened, of course, before Stonewall and its significance. So please go ahead and take the time to look into these protests that I stated today. Dewey's, Cooper's Donuts, and Compton Cafeteria, even the Black Cat Tavern was another one. Go ahead and look into those. I think that would be very handy for you guys to check it out, and I think that you guys will all love it. So, of course, until next time, guys, what you can do is follow me on Instagram at mariiiwrld. That is MAR3IWRLD. Same thing on my YouTube channel as well. If you want to check out my website, it is www.amarimcgee.com. All this, of course, will be in the episode description below. And until next time, I will see you guys next Sunday for a brand new lesson on the trans lesson plan. And until then, peace.